A long time ago, man tried imitating the image of his celestial god and created a sphere. With it, he recreated his movement and began to adore him. At some point, ceremonies celebrated with the sacred sphere derived into games of talent and skill. Rivalry and competitive spirit did the rest. In the course of more than 2,000 years, warriors and noblemen of ancient Eastern dynasties, American pre-Columbian priests, Roman soldiers, medieval knights, and commoners slowly created the most popular sport on the planet. And football became a reality thanks to a group of wonderful madmen that met in 1863 at a London tavern to establish the rules. But those men discussed the standards of a game that already existed. A game that was practiced by their ancestors. The question is, since when? Let's travel back in time to search for the origins of football. Our story takes us back to the 2nd century in a small Breton village. The Romans were threatening their towns and traditions, but this was a sacred night. The Druids lit a purifying flame to prepare for the Lunessa, the festival in honor of the sun god Lu. At sunrise, they celebrated a ceremony that welcomed Lu, considered to be the maker of light. With a simple prayer, they would ask his wife, the earth goddess, to bless their harvest and have the sun protect them with its warmth and light. A druid would raise a rustic leather sphere towards the sky in a simple representation of the sun. These ceremonies, however, weren't exclusive to the Druids and the Celtic people. In many other parts of the world, similar scenes were being carried out. Priests from very different cultures used similar spherical objects to worship the great fountain of life, the sun. One of nature's greatest mysteries was the setting and rising of this celestial body. The high priest shows the others the movement of the sun. He pleads for it not to be detained during his voyage through the skies. Life must continue, and harvests must be claimed. The city of Teotihuacan was first built in times of Jesus Christ, but its civilization disappeared 700 years later. In this mural, essential to understanding their customs, we can appreciate a great variety of games that were practiced with a ball. The inhabitants of this enigmatic city, like many others, used a sacred sphere for something other than venerating the sun god. Back then, the most important events in the lives of these people were sowing and harvesting. So during those days, more than any other, they needed to ask or thank the gods for their benevolence. The priests conceived ceremonies to plead the sun for light and to favor the success of the harvest. Symbolically, the mere contact of the sacred ball with the earth represented the act of fertilization. Over time, these rituals gave way to other ball games. A match between two clans in Teotihuacan is about to begin. Quickly, we realize that it resembles our game of football. The Teotihuacan game consisted of moving the ball to the opposing team's end by touching it a maximum of 4 times and only with their feet, forearms, or hips. The ball could be hit directly or after one single bounce, not more. The playing field was circumscribed by 4 fixed markers. 2 other mobile markers signaled the dividing line between opponents. When a team failed, the mobile marker moved back, setting a new dividing line and reducing the opponent's territory. When one of the teams managed to move the dividing line all the way back, they earned a point. The first team who marked 5 points would win the game. The people of Teotihuacan were the first to create a ball that would bounce. Unlike the Celts, this ball wasn't made of animal hide, but of a material unknown to the rest of the world: rubber. The red team's striker is about to reach the opponent's goalpost. 1 more point, and they'll celebrate victory. The players on the green team are unable to regain the ball, and the red team wins. It becomes evident that the Teotihuacan game has certain similarities with football, but its practice became extinct along with their civilization. Players in other ball games that appeared in America with these characteristics would not use their feet to hit the ball. Our journey takes us back to Britannia, where the Romans have defeated the Britons. Exhausted and having suffered many casualties, the Romans are forced to recruit new soldiers. For months, the new recruits are submitted to an infinite amount of physical exercise and military instruction. The long marches where they would carry heavy equipment alternated with combat techniques. Those who didn't keep up were expelled. One of the exercises that stood out among the future soldiers was called harpastum. In ancient Europe, ceremonies using the sacred sphere derived in recreational practices. First were the Greeks, and then the Romans, who created different ball games. Roman instructors applied this game to combat. The harpastum was both simple and brutal. In a rectangular-shaped field, 2 teams had to fight for the ball and move it behind the opposing team's dividing line by employing all necessary violence. The custom at this training camp consisted of celebrating a match of harpastum between the instructors and the new recruits. Their rage, so ingrained at this point, gives them strength. They've lost their fear. The head instructor, exhausted by the match, understands that it won't be an easy win. The decisive point is yet to be won. If they pull it off, their opponents will be defeated. Although sometimes they used their feet to kick the ball, it wasn't the custom when playing harpastum. Yet the shape of the field, the scoring of points, and its competitive nature would be decisive in the future. The inhabitants of the small Breton village walk to the sacred site of the ancient Druids. When they are all gathered, the sound of a horn reaches the neighboring village, announcing a challenge. They await their answer with impatience. If they reply, the great game will begin. The challenge has been accepted, and there's no time to lose. Both villages must meet at an established place, a piece of painted wood on a tree, on the outskirts of the village.
To the river!
They all run towards the river to meet their adversaries. The game must begin. Their Breton ancestors also created games based on ancient Celtic solar rites, but 400 years of Roman culture supplied them with the competitive factor. Once they come face to face, the leader of the defiant village confronts his rivals. Taking advantage of their opponent's confusion, they manage to pass the ball to a player who, avoiding the enemy, runs forward towards the rival village. His goal is to hit the ball against the piece of wood tied to the tree. Throughout centuries of Roman rule, Bretons incorporated harpastum's competitive nature into their primitive Celtic games. And this was the result. Men, women, and children fought to move the leather ball to the opponent's field. Does this sound familiar? The representation of Sul, the Celtic sun goddess, became the Sul, a ball that gave its name to the games played by the Bretons. The mountains, rivers, and valleys separating both villages would become the playing field. The game lasted all day. Even though the norm would be to carry the ball and protect it from the opponents by using their hands, kicking it added speed and avoided unnecessary tackling. Sooner or later, the Sul gets trapped in a crowded melee where only a few players are able to pass the ball to the fastest members of their team. As the sun sets, the neighbors that set the challenge have managed to move the ball close to the other village's wooden piece. Their opponents resist desperately. Suddenly, someone signals. Following a set plan, they pass the ball to a girl who hits the leather sphere against the piece of wood, obtaining their victory. Their triumph will travel throughout the region, and the minstrels together with the heroes of the Sun, will sing of their heroic deed. Today is Shrove Tuesday, and the neighbors of a small town in Ashburn get ready for the Royal Shrovetide football, a match that has been in dispute ever since the 12th century. After we hear God Save the Queen, it's time for the kickoff, and the match begins. In the 11th century, the ancient Celtic game, transformed into what we know as Sul, made its comeback to England thanks to the Normans. Its practice quickly extended, especially during Carnival. It was then that the word football was used for the first time. The Shrovetide football is the Carnival football. The goalposts have been set by the riverbed with a 5-kilometer distance from each other. The objective is to hit the ball 3 times against a grindstone that has been embedded into a stone wall. The word goal comes from the Germanic, the mother tongue of the Saxons and Normans, and it means objective or target. In Ashburn, the legendary Workington Manual is still in use today, establishing that anything, except killing, is permitted in order to move the ball towards the opponent's goalpost. Although medieval football didn't reach its splendor until the 14th and 15th centuries, it didn't go well for the people in power. During the 100 Years' War, the commoners couldn't waste any time playing. Instead, they needed to enlist in the army. To make matters worse, playing during holidays reduced the number of patrons of the clergy, and the commotion along the streets unsettled commerce and the authorities. In the midst of the 16th century, Oliver Cromwell banned the practice of football, but one of his ancestors would cross his path again. On the streets of Florence, a historical event is still remembered. Even though they waited out the siege set by Emperor Charles V, the Florentines were called to witness the traditional game during Carnival in order to boost their morale. 5 centuries later, the city continues to pay homage to their heroic ancestors. Carnival in Florence also bolsters the medieval game of harpastum. At the beginning of the 15th century, the first games of calcio were disputed. The word calcio means to kick in Italian. Whether it's a coincidence or a premonition, calcio and football, words that are related to feet, were used to name games which employed hands. The game is about to begin. The players, confronted in the middle of the field, wait for the palaio, the person in charge of the pala, or ball, to toss it up in the air. During those first few moments, the ball is of least importance. The tension between the rivals that has accumulated throughout the year suddenly explodes. The scene is dantesque. But finally, the referee manages to calm the spirits, and the game is played in a less tumultuous manner. As in harpastum, the main goal is to move the ball behind the enemy lines. There, a semi-cylindric net marks the scoring area. If the ball falls under the net, a caccia is obtained. If it falls above it, a half point is gained. Unlike English football played during Carnival, the Florentine calcio had already established in the 15th century a set of rules that simulates today's game. The field was rectangular in shape. The players wore uniforms with distinct colors, and each player was assigned a specific mission. The game we are watching is played by the same rules as in ancient times. Each team is composed of 27 players distributed in 4 lines. In today's terms, we could say that the tactical disposition is 3-4-5-15, meaning 3 goalkeepers, 4 defenders, 5 midfielders, and 15 strikers. Similar to American football, the strikers try to hold back the defenders in order to clear the field so their team can score a point. The players engage in the game with no contemplations. The leader of the Verdi controls the ball and watches his teammates try to clear the way towards the opponent's side. The gap is open, and he successfully gets the ball to go underneath the net. The sound of cannons certify that they have won a caccia. Although these players prefer to handle the ball with their hands, the calcio allows for both hands and feet indistinctly. The end of the game is almost near. The following play will be decisive. The Verdi have scored. The passion among players and fans is overwhelming. They all impatiently await the final blow of the whistle. In 1680, when football was still banned in England, Count Albemarle, who was on a diplomatic mission in Florence, attended a game of calcio. When he returned to England full of excitement, he informed Charles II of the virtuosity and ferocity of the Florentine calcio. Upon the insistence of his noblemen, the king revoked the ban on football in 1681. Towards the end of the 17th century, football became less massive and began to be played in smaller areas, and individual skills gained importance. At the beginning of the 19th century, colleges and universities took over the practice of football. Dr. Thomas Arnold, headmaster of the rugby school, said that football fomented individual sacrifice on behalf of teamwork. Back in 1823, a student at the school, William Webb Ellis, was the star in a transcendental event in the history of this sport.
Let's go.
Ellis and his team systematically lost all games due to their rivals' superior skills. Today, they must win, or they'll once again be the laughingstock of the school.
Let's do it!
The size and the rules of colleges forced the students to turn the chaotic carnival football into a more organized game. Applying discipline and team spirit, students created their own rules, and without realizing its transcendence, they discovered the key to developing modern-day football. First, they limited the areas in which they practiced the sport, and on either end, they set posts that substituted walls or trees. Thus, goals and the playing fields were created. But they weren't the first to do this. After years of doubtful policies inherited from his predecessors, Emperor Wu Di recuperated the stability of the empire. Under his command, the Han Dynasty enjoyed one of its most prosperous periods. These are times of celebrations, and the emperor, together with his empress and their entourage of dignitaries, are getting ready to witness one of their favorite pastimes. Like the Romans, the Chinese army used an old popular game to train their soldiers. In times of peace, they had to keep them engaged for any possible contingency, and Chu Tzu was a great way to do it. At these tournaments, the emperor could then confirm the state his troops were in. As indicated by the protocol, the master of ceremonies informs the attendants that their Imperial Highness has arranged for a Chu Tzu match among his most valiant soldiers. Then he asks the emperor for permission to have the game begin. The emperor grants the permission, and the players are called to the field. Chu Tzu is a very old game. The first testimonies go back to the times of legendary Huang Di, the Yellow Emperor, some 2,700 years BC. But it is during the Han Dynasty that the game used in military training acquired its competitive nature and a precise set of rules. After the solemn salutation ceremony, the drums signal the start of the game. The main referee throws the ball towards one of the teams, and the game begins. As incredible as it may seem, the game of Chu Tzu was played like this more than 2,000 years ago. It's the oldest game that shares a resemblance with football as it is known today, even though it isn't influenced by it. Chu Tzu is played with two teams of 12 players each within a four-sided wall. Two of the walls have 6 curved goals called jushi, where the players have to hit the ball in order to score a chou, or goal. The most difficult score is considered to be any of the 4 central goals. When a team scores in any of them, they gain 2 points. The game is played with the feet only. Each team has 6 defenders and 6 strikers, who can charge and demolish their opponents, but they cannot defend. The 2 judges make sure the rules are applied. In order for everything to go as planned, the Chinese, as well as the people from Teotihuacan, created a ball that was practically spherical. Made of leather, but with a hard inner core, it weighed more to strengthen the warrior's legs and to keep the ball from rising too high when it was kicked, due to the size of the goalposts. Like the Celtic and Teotihuacan cultures, the elements of Chu Tzu were established by the sun's movements. The ball symbolized the sun on Earth, and the 4 sides of the field represented the seasons of the year. The game has ended. The emperor could care less about the results. He's satisfied by his soldiers' dedication. These players were the first to practice a game that resembles football today. Since the 7th century, Jutsu has been reformed in each subsequent dynasty. Little by little, it's lost its competitive nature. From a military training exercise, it simply became a way of entertainment for noblemen and the upper classes. The change was a radical one. The struggle for the ball in order to defeat the enemy was soon replaced by the enjoyment of controlling it with the feet and passing it to a member of the same team. During the 9th and 10th centuries, many Chinese customs became rooted among the Japanese aristocracy, and among them was Jutsu. The Japanese first called it Syukiku, and later it became Kemari. In other parts of Asia, people agreed. The ideographic characters in Chinese and Japanese coincided, and their significance was the same: football. At the beginning of the 11th century, Kemari became a very popular sport in Japan. Noblemen, samurais, priests, and commoners found in it an ideal way of developing their physical skills in a relaxing and pleasurable environment. But Kemari, like many other Japanese traditions, disappeared in 1868 with the changes promoted by Emperor Meiji, a fanatic supporter of Western customs. Today, members of associations that work to preserve the game keep playing Kemari as they did in ancient times. Throughout the centuries, the concept of the game has suffered very few changes. The game consists of 8 players who are arranged in a circle. They can move freely in search of the ball, but must return to their position after hitting it. The object of the game is to maintain the ball in the air as long as possible. It can only be touched with the feet, and each player has a maximum of 3 hits before passing it to another. Jutsu's elegant successor gave up its combative nature. The players only intended to enjoy a relaxing and harmonious game. William and his teammates try to avoid defeat. The rules are simple, but very precise. The object is to land the ball right between the opponent's goalposts. William's face shows disappointment. His team can't stop them. Some of the rules were rather curious. In order to stop the opponent, you could push, but not hold on to him. You could make him trip and kick him, but always under the knees. The field was limitless, and the only reference points were the 2 goalposts. The crossbar was still to be invented. William's desperation was reaching its limit. Together with his teammates, he furiously tried stopping his opponents from moving forward. Blinded by rage and impotence, he grabbed the ball with his hands and started running towards the enemy goalposts. No one, not even William Webb Ellis, realized the transcendence of his acts. Breaking the rules, he scored an illegal goal, running with the ball in his hands. The rugby school quickly adopted this way of playing and set new rules, provoking a division among the supporters of the traditional game. Those in favor of the traditional way of playing couldn't trail behind. They thought they must unify their rules, or William Ellis's myth would end up prevailing. Students at Cambridge University took the initiative. In October of 1848, they organized a meeting at Trinity College and invited students from other important colleges and universities to attend. It was the first real confrontation between two ways of playing the game. Supporters of the use of feet imposed their view. They wanted to keep the game simple and avoid any rough play. The Cambridge rules, as they were called, would become the base of modern-day football. The Cambridge rules began using the word football to define the game. It established limits on the field with goalposts and approved the use of a string that limited the height of the posts. If the ball is on the ground, the player can only touch it with his feet in order to dribble, pass it to a team member, or kick it towards the opposing field. But if it's in the air, he can grab it with his hands and kick it. The ball always marked offsides. A player could not touch the ball if it was in front of him during a pass. The figure of the goalkeeper didn't exist, and the defenders were only able to clear shots with their feet. The only thing left standing from the old Freemasons Tavern is part of its name in the modern pub located in this building on Great Queen Street, rebuilt after a fire at the beginning of the 20th century. But let's go back in time to learn about the mythical meeting held in 1863, where football, as the world now knows it, was founded. Although they didn't all agree to approve the Cambridge rules, veteran supporters of the rugby game returned with their old habits. After endless meetings, only 12 clubs in the British capital were still determined to create an association that would unify the rules of football once and for all. With the exception of the tenacious Blackheath representatives, all other rugby supporters have retired. They are determined to play with their hands and to favor a rougher game than the one promoted by the Cambridge supporters. However, Mr. Morley from the Barnes Club had written some rules that expressed the will of the majority of attendants. A simple game with no rough playing. The final votes provoked a definite schism. Football and rugby would go their separate ways. The Football Association wasn't just a group of teams. It signified a philosophy of a new sport that wanted to distance itself from the rough traditional game. Its founders chose to design the game we all enjoy today.
The representatives from Blackheath have chosen to leave our association. Confident in that hope, I propose a toast. To the newly created Football Association! To the Football Association! Hip, hip, hooray! Hip, hooray! Hip, hip, hooray!
After the meeting at Freemasons Tavern, the old way of playing football was divided among associations and rugby players. The Football Association adopted the Cambridge rules, but paradoxically, it introduced modifications that resemble the game of rugby. The mark was one of them. The player, upon taking the ball, had to scream "mark" and mark the ground. The game was stopped so he could kick the ball without being harassed. In 1866, coaches from the Football Association found a magical formula to ban the use of hands forever and thus change the concept of offsides. To do it, they elaborated a similar rule to the current offsides we are familiar with today. In front of the ball and receive a forward pass. The game became much more attractive and it began to adopt its. In 1871, a new character breaks into the scene. The goalkeeper is born during the first great championship, the England Cup. The game of football is ready for its great leap forward. The right changes made to the game and the celebration of the first important tournaments is what made the practice of football spread so rapidly. Football fever now expanded outside the borders of the British Isles. During those years, the economic and political predominance of Great Britain was unquestionable. The British, upon moving to the number of countries where their companies operated from, transmitted many of their customs to the people in those places. And precisely then was a time when a sport called football was in fashion. The way in which the British got the rest of the world hooked on football was practically the same used everywhere else. The scenes we will witness would be reproduced with some variance in many other corners of the planet. Some years ago, English workers arrived at the mines of Rio Tinto. Being far away from home, in a mining town of 2,000 inhabitants and with very few distractions, their free time turned out to be quite distressing. Something needed to be done to fight boredom. The children would not easily forget that Sunday afternoon. They knew the English did strange things, but this was too much. Upon seeing them stripped down to their underwear, the young boys thought that the heat had caused derangement. Their confusion increased when two men argued over who takes the ball. Surprisingly, the one that ends up with the ball kicks it, and they all start running after it. Just imagine what you would think if you saw some men in their underwear running after a ball for the first time in your life. Well, that's probably what the surprised Spaniards thought when they saw such a spectacle. The first game didn't sit well among the natives. They couldn't just let some foreigners shock their children with their libertine pastimes. Little by little, the natives became accustomed to the game of the eccentric English. The seed was planted, and it was about to blossom. The simple game with the simple rules created by those wonderful, crazy students at Cambridge had seduced their fellow countrymen and started to attract people from all over the world. The English also exported golf and tennis, but these games required more complex installations. To play football, all you needed was a flat field, a ball, and some pieces of wood to create the goalposts. Interest for the sport increased, and teams were created all around the world.
Oui. Oui. Cela fait 1 an et vous ne vous êtes toujours pas décidé.
Laissez tomber, Monsieur Willem, nous ne pouvons pas perdre plus de temps.
Just like it occurred in the British Isles, clubs from each country united to form different national associations and thus regulate their competitions. Straight away, the football scene lacked an organizing body that would regulate the relationship among them. Robert Guérin, responsible for French football, together with Dutch Karl Anton Wilhelm, convinced several European colleagues of the need to create an international association in order to manage the encounters between the clubs and teams from different national federations. Up until the last moment, Mr. Guerin waited for the support of the International Board, made up of the federations of Scotland, England, Wales, and Ireland, but they refused the invitation. So in 1904, the representatives of France, Belgium, Denmark, Holland, Sweden, Switzerland, and Spain signed the founding agreement of the International Federation of Association Football. Let us not forget that association football was the name given to this sport. 1 year later, the British federations, pioneers and creators of the rules, decided to join. During this agreement, the representatives decided to name Robert Guerin the first president of the FIFA.
Messieurs, je propose comme président Monsieur Robert Guerin.
It's the first time they face each other. The players from Nerva have formed a team and have come to Rio Tinto to play a match. The players can't let their family and friends down. The referees start to become the bad guys in the story, even though, in this case, a penalty has been awarded in favor of the local team. The penalty is decisive. Years of rivalry are concentrated in very brief but intense moments of tension. Honor and glory depend on an unmerciful duel. The players of Rio Tinto have won. Their victory is also that of their family members and friends, who in turn make up the entire village they represent. The identity among the team and its supporters will never be broken. The same thing was happening in an infinite number of villages, towns, and cities on all 5 continents. There were no minstrels who sang about their victories, but they were the new heroes, and no matter what happened, they would never walk alone. That's football, a succession of brief magical moments that are filled with enthusiasm and bitterness as well. During those instances, time goes by slowly, making long-lasting sensations. The elixir of passion is a powerful drug which is difficult to escape from, and football becomes a laboratory that specializes in supplying it. Throughout the centuries, its addicts have proliferated the world over. In modern-day stadiums, the new heroes aren't alone. On the field, they're joined by the spirit of everyone who has contributed to creating the story of a dream, which today becomes a reality every time it is played.